the marriage health law required that all those seeking marriage licenses had to undergo screening to prevent so-called degenerate people from marrying healthy Germans.
And that was something that was happening in the United States too,
Right.
on a state-by-state basis. But it was very common in the United States even until the 1970s or 80s, I think, maybe later than that, for people to have to get blood tests before they could get marriage licenses.
They interpreted degeneracy quite broadly, though, including mental and physical disabilities, but also criminal and asocial tendencies, which most eugenicists agreed were inherited in the same way as eye or hair color.
But the quality of the Volk wasn't just defined by racial purity. It also had a sort of intangible quality that had to do with one's ability to contribute to the betterment of the Volk. Historian Edith Scheffer refers to this quality as Gemüt, a word that has a long history in German culture. The meaning of Gemüt shifted over time, from Immanuel Kant declaring that it was the origin of a person's transcendental faculties, to the 19th century connotations of sociability, having strong bonds with friends and family, being friendly and connected. During the Third Reich, Gemüt became a critical part of being part of the Volk. In a 1938 German dictionary, Gemüt was defined as, quote, a term peculiar to the Germans and not translatable into any language, involving the feeling of inwardness of the soul with which the German man experiences himself and his entire being, rooted deeply in his racial feelings and values. And I think there we can see how there are these strong connections between ability and race, right? Those are still kind of connected. Another dictionary stated that having Gemüt would endow the environment with a spiritual quality, and that a person with Gemüt would, quote, feel a cosmic empathy for and an ability to integrate himself into the natural and human world that envelops him. Gemüt, therefore, came to indicate your connectedness or integration into the German community, both racially, socially, and even spiritually.
And this makes sense when you think about how very collective and social the Nazi state was. Young men were expected to join the Hitler Youth, which trained them to be good German citizens and soldiers and filled them with a sense of loyalty and nationalism. Similarly, girls were expected to join the Bund Deutscher Madel, or the League of German Girls, which trained them to be healthy and capable mothers and wives.
Which is in itself eugenic,
yes.
Right?
Adults were supposed to work in support of the collective good, fight in the armies, or study in the universities, or manufacture Volkswagens to advance the interests of the Volk. So disabled people pose a number of threats to the German state. If they were physically disabled, they might not be able to perform work to support the collective, and instead become useless eaters, consuming resources and offering nothing in return. Those with hereditary diseases had the potential to infect the racially pure and healthy Volk, and those with intellectual or psychiatric disabilities, or even those who were deemed asocial for being criminals or being promiscuous or just even being troublesome at school or home, were problematic because they did not have Gemüt. In fact, this was the greatest quality that Austrian physician Dr. Hans Asperger used to diagnose children with what he called autistic psychopathy, or what we might now label autism. Autism, according to Asperger, was effectively a spectrum of Gemüt. Those who lacked Gemüt could not be integrated into the Volk, but others diagnosed with autistic psychopathy, but with still some level of sociability, could.
Right. So we understand autism as a spectrum.
Right.
And those who have what, until I think recently, and maybe still in the vernacular today, are called having Asperger's or Asperger's, they still had enough Gemüt that they could be rehabilitated. But then people on the other end of the spectrum, people who are nonverbal or, were more severely autistic, had this autistic psychopathy, could not be rehabilitated because they lacked Gemüt. So even if, again, ethnically German, but lacking Gemüt.
The understanding of coercive control is complicated by our social nature and obedience-based education. We are not by nature lone creatures. From the moment of birth, we are shaped by our society's traditions and conventions, from the language we speak, to our beliefs and biases. To be outside society is to be a loner, an outcast, or, at best, an eccentric. We are certainly at our happiest when we feel that we belong to a group. We are sociable creatures and thrive on interaction, cooperation, and competition. Exploitative persuasion or coercive control draws upon our sociable and cooperative nature. It is vital to understand both the inborn and the social drives that prepare us for collaboration with the exploiters, if we are to undo manipulation and make a society that is resilient against future manipulation. Exploitation takes the raw material of the normal human psyche and amplifies the existing need to belong. Founding father of social science Gustave Le Bon said, "By the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Isolated, he may be a cultivated individual. In a crowd, he is a barbarian." Authoritarians reduce individuality to crowd membership, as Hitler proved. Many studies show that this is a natural process. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Membership in a group can transform highly intelligent people overnight, even when all concerned know they are part of an experiment. During the summer recess of 1971, Professor Philip Zimbardo staged the now notorious Stanford Prison Experiment. 15 student volunteers became jailers, and 9 became prisoners, serving in a specifically built facility set up in the basement of Stanford University. Not one of the students asked to be a jailer, but despite the flowering of peace and love in California, all took readily to the task. Participants were carefully screened to be normal, healthy, and average on all the psychological dimensions we measured. Generally representative of middle-class educated youth. The guards, normal college students, every one of them initially reluctant to act as guards, enforced their rule physically, pushing and even striking their charges. The guards force-fed a prisoner who refused to eat, and met rebellion by stripping the prisoners naked and depriving them of mattresses. They used a fire extinguisher to spray dissenters, and ordered the prisoners to perform humiliating sexual pantomimes during roll call. The prisoners soon gave up their protest, and their initial good humor faded into sullen subservience. The whole experiment was cut short after just a week, because the psychological changes in both guards and prisoners had escalated to alarming proportions. Even Professor Zimbardo had become so engrossed in the experiment that he had to be persuaded to cut the study short. As Milgram said, the behavior revealed in the experiments reported here is normal human behavior, but revealed under conditions that show with particular clarity the danger to human survival inherent in our makeup. And what is it that we have seen? Not aggression, for there is no anger, vindictiveness or hatred in those who shocked the victim. Something far more dangerous is revealed: the capacity for man to abandon his humanity. As he merges his unique personality into larger institutional structures, it is ironic that the virtues of loyalty, discipline, and self-sacrifice that we value so highly in the individual are the very properties that create destructive organizational engines of war and bind men to malevolent systems of authority.
Guess what? They're working on new technology that will infiltrate into our privacy in a way that hasn't been done before. That's what everyone in the world wants, isn't it? It seems we all want to become as one with machines. Yeah, hell, we don't even want to be human anymore. Being human, it's so much yesterday's news. It's so overrated being human, isn't it? Like freedom and liberty and the right to choose what you want to do with your life. Alright? Sorry for the sarcastic intro. But anyway, look, Apple is developing a mental health monitor for iPhone. The tool could help diagnose depression and cognitive decline. Apple is reportedly building technology to help diagnose depression and cognitive decline, all kinds of digital tools, ultimately algorithms in their phones, aiming to collect user data on mobility, physical activity, sleep patterns, heart rate, because they want to monitor your health. They say detect signs of specific conditions. They just want to stick their nose into all of your business. They want to own you, basically. Another reason for all of this health monitoring is because in a not too distant future, they don't want you to go and see doctors anymore. It'll just be an app. It's kind of like that now. You've got those stupid smartwatches. Here's a hint. If it's got the word smart in front of it, run a mile the other way. Anyway, these smartwatches, Apple smartwatches, track people's sleep. They check their heart rate. They start a mindfulness session, record their menstrual cycle, even set up a hand washing timer.
We started working on RNA to try and understand why it was so inflammatory. We were both completely open-minded. Any data that we didn't understand, and there was a lot of it, we sat down, we kept doing experiments, we kept getting results, we kept getting excited by the results.
Middle of the night, submitting grants, and 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, sending each other, and you are still up, and I'm still up.
We couldn't have come to the result without both of us being involved.
I was making the RNA, and Drew was checking whether it is immunogenic, not immunogenic. Then he gives the data, and we lead over, and we try to understand and make sense of it.
We figured out how to make it non-inflammatory.
And then our mind was all over the place.
Just going in every direction.
We were amazed that, oh my God, this is what it means. It was very enjoyable. To be a scientist is a joy.
Oh, isn't that nice? All for the good of your health, so it is. All this spying on you and your health. Of course it is. But this is a new thing. As if that wasn't enough, they now want to monitor your mental health and diagnose cognitive issues. It says here, the goal of these sorts of detection tools is to enable professionals to intervene early and prevent adverse outcomes, like giving someone a front row seat to your brain's activity without having to pay for therapy. Here's a clip
Smartphones could soon alert you to signs of depression or declines in mental capacity. The Wall Street Journal says Apple is developing an algorithm that will keep track of your physical activity levels, sleep patterns, mobility, facial expressions, as well as heart and respiration rates. It's actually two separate projects. The first, codenamed Seabreeze, is focusing on anxiety, depression, and stress levels. The other, codenamed Pi, is focusing on cognitive impairment, including conditions that can lead to Alzheimer's.
So you can see how and where this is going, the technology, the passports, and how far, they're planning to infiltrate into your personal space. I mean, they want to get into your mind, for goodness sake. You remember me telling you to destroy your phones? You thought I was joking. I'm not. They want to monitor your mental health and determine if you have a mental condition.
So much here and so many connections that I think we could just talk about this forever, probably. But, I think that there have been, disturbing examples of when there have been government overreach in terms of public health, like subjugating a particular person for the betterment of society, right? And that can be very negative in terms of, my example here was Mary Mallon, or Typhoid Mary, who was imprisoned, incarcerated for the majority of her life because she was a healthy carrier of typhoid.
Yeah.
But what the Germans were talking about in the 1930s was kind of it seems so horrific to us today, right? But that's because with hindsight we can see how far on the spectrum it is.
Yeah.
But it also fits within this thing, this spectrum where we do tolerate a certain amount of this kind of state control, if that made any sense. As the Weimar gave way to the Nazi regime in 1933, German scientists found that their wildest dreams were directly in line with Nazi ideology. After all, the eugenicists openly called for a rise of the Volk, this pure, strong, united German people. The eugenicists made their living trying to find ways to use science to achieve such a thing, right? And while the Americans never were able to go quite so far as to call for euthanasia because of the political climate in the United States, there are a couple glaring exceptions to that, one being Harry Heiselden, author of the book The Black Stork, in which he recounts when he withheld care from a very sick infant. The more radical eugenicists in Germany found a natural home with the radical politics of the NSDAP. The German scientists benefited from the funding and the support offered by the Third Reich. In return, the scientists offered their expertise to the Nazis, teaching classes on race hygiene, conducting scientific research that benefited the Reich, and working to create the race and ability categories that could be used to exclude those deemed outside of the Volk. For instance, one of the things that eugenicists were obsessed with, both in Germany and outside of Germany, was genealogy, the careful study of entire family lines to determine their fitness and purity. These family histories were then used in Germany to determine who was in and who was out of the Volk. As Henry Friedlander notes, they fully supported the regime's policy of exclusion designed to improve the racial stock of the German nation.
The project to cleanse the fatherland began not with killing, but in the same way that it started in the United States, with forced sterilization. In July 1933, just months after Hitler's appointment as chancellor, Germany began to require that all those diagnosed with certain mental and physical disabilities, including schizophrenia, congenital feeble-mindedness, manic depression, epilepsy, Huntington's disease, blindness, deafness, hereditary deformity, and alcoholism, be sterilized to prevent them from having children. A few months later, the marriage health law required that all those seeking marriage licenses had to undergo screening to prevent so-called degenerate people from marrying healthy Germans.